Hello, everyone. I'm Cherie Burton, and welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, just know that it is a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. And that's actually what I'm going to talk about today. It's kind of like getting to the core of you and figuring out who you are. If you listened to mine and my sister Tanya's episode last week, we kind of went down this road of emancipating yourself. I just wanted to do a follow-up to that because it made it have raised some eyebrows in some circles, which is okay. I'm really not about people pleasing at this stage of my life, but also just to clarify that you wouldn't emancipate yourself until you feel ready. We have to be dependent on systems. Like when we're a baby, we're dependent on our mom and our caregivers to take care of us and feed us. We have these dependencies and they're healthy on different groups and systems and programs and people. At some point we graduate. At some point we individuate. And that's a little bit of where I'm going today is like, how do you know when you're ready to become emancipated, where you can actually trust yourself? Self-trust is something that you have to cultivate and have to work at because continuously we get reminded of how we need to second guess ourselves. And there's so many things that pop up that keep us off track from our own knowing. And they come from outside voices and outside sources. Just kind of, again, going back to mine and my sister Tanya's episode last week on claiming your own personal freedom. And how do you know if you're truly free? And how do you know if, you've been enslaved to something? Or how do you know that you're not being deceived? Or how do you know, right? I want to start with this quote by Brene Brown, and it's about midlife. Okay, so midlife actually to me means something different than it used to. I used to think of that term midlife crisis, which is actually a real thing. I'm 51 years old. So I'm definitely in midlife. It used to be seen as a crisis because it actually is a point of reckoning for you. It's a real thing. And if any of you have ever had your natal chart done or your solar return from someone who's really versed in the art of understanding planetary alignment, they will tell you that literally there's a return on your natal chart that has you come back, and it's usually around age 50, sometimes sooner, that you can come back to reflect on where you've come this far and what you know. A lot of it has to do with self-identity. So midlife crisis to me means actually a graduation into owning yourself and really finding your own voice, your own likes and dislikes. And so anyway, I'm just going to read this by Brene Brown. I think midlife is when the universe gently places her hands upon your shoulders, pulls you close and whispers in your ear, "I'm not screwing around. It's time." All of this pretending and performing, these coping mechanisms that you've developed to protect yourself from feeling inadequate and getting hurt has to go. Your armor is preventing you from growing into your gifts. I understand that you needed these protections when you were small. I understand that you believed your armor could help you secure all of the things you needed to get to feel worthy of love and belonging. But you're still searching, and you're more lost than ever. Time is growing short. There are unexplored adventures ahead of you. You can't live the rest of your life worried about what other people think. You were born worthy of love and belonging. Courage and daring are coursing through you. You were made to live and love with your whole heart. It's time to show up and be seen. I really love that. I think it encapsulates a lot of what I was trying to communicate last week. My sister and I, just kind of talking about how we had our own little awakening, big awakening. We went into the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul is kind of a crisis. The dark night of the soul is a reckoning with yourself and your own soul. And it has nothing to do with anyone else on the planet. It's you facing you. And usually it is presented in a way that you can't run from it anymore. It's like, here is what you've been asking for. This is what you really want. But do you really want to see it? Do you really want to see yourself? Do you really want to know what you like? Are you tired of pretending? So this whole thing about putting armor on and how that prevents you from growing into who you are, into your true gifts, your zones of genius, your passions, what makes you feel alive. You could be sitting next to a person and you're in the exact same setting and you are bored to tears and they are lit up with bliss, And that's why there isn't a one size fits all when it comes to finding your true self, because soul expression is so diverse. We don't leap to our highest potential and soar spiritually and become enlightened, and that magically they're just one day going to line up. That's a fallacy. That's an illusion. We think that if we do all the quote unquote right things, everything will flow. And that causes depression in a lot of people because they are ticking the boxes. They are doing everything quote unquote right, or what they've been told to do, and they're still miserable. They're still sad. They feel an emptiness. They feel like they're missing something. They feel like they're not smart enough to get it, or they're not being good enough and they've missed a blessing, or they've missed an insight or a gem because they weren't doing something right. When external obstacles are removed, we actually lose the desire to change. We need opposition. We want things to change, but not our habits. And so we're just wired antithetical to enlightened being and enlightened doing and evolving. We want certainty and safety and calmness and comfort and sameness, right? We want the fitting in and the belonging that Brené Brown talked about. We're wired to want that. But we have to step outside the known and go into a wilderness in order to actually become enlightened. And we aren't taught that. But Jesus did that, actually. Buddha did that. It's this whole leave me to my work, leave me to my knowing in order to receive that enlightenment. And we have this tendency, I feel like, to blame external circumstances rather than taking this evolutionary route, to look inside, to take that inner radical self-accountability. And it's a hard truth that we all house this ego. We have all these protective mechanisms in place. But if we really answered the call of our soul, our own spirit, our divine spirit, there's this evolutionary impulse to expand, to go bigger, to think bigger, to feel more. And this evolutionary impulse is also wired in us. Even though we don't want to do the hard things, we still have this, and that's the tension we feel. We want to stay comfortable. That feels good. That feels safe. But to actually evolve and progress in deep ways, we have to face those external obstacles and not necessarily remove them. You become more powerful in the process of this, is what I'm saying. It doesn't have to take a long time. It's not as exhausting maybe as we've made it out to be in our mind. There's a saying, doing isn't difficult, deciding is. We are only human, and it makes us more comfortable to say that to ourselves. But that also can sometimes help us play smaller. We don't have to settle on the mindset that this is just how I am. This is just the way I'm built. I'm going to stay with the group think. I'm going to stay with the norm. I'm going to eat median, in the middle. I'm going to stay safe. I used to buy that. The paradox of that is, yes, there is a lot of truth in that, actually. We're not talking about being a rebel or a rogue. We're talking about being a revolutionary. Because until all of these systems and groups are healed, it takes a few brave people to step out of the norm and the box and call out some of the illusion and distortion. So yeah, we are only human, and we have to accept our humanness, and that's part of our power. However, we don't use that as the excuse to not take this evolutionary impulse we have and roll with it and run with it. So you have your true self, and then you have your false self. Okay, so your true self is that soul self. It's your eternal reality. It's your divine nature. The false self is built up on all these ego structures. And so we don't know sometimes where that leaves off and our true self begins. And no one can tell us that. We have to discover it. It's actually a process and experiential thing that we work with. So one of the staples to put into your life, not that I'm telling you what to do, but I feel like this is just a universal staple in order to make this soul voice or your true absolute self voice so loud that it drowns out all the others. And that's to just have a very consistent daily spiritual practice. I would keep it open to what comes through you. When I'm talking about a spiritual practice, I'm not telling you to read a set of things to reinforce the beliefs you already have. That can be expansive for sure. But I'm talking about being completely open to what the divine wants to come through to share with you. It's kind of the principle of the closed versus open belief system that I shared on the episode with Tanya, where if a person thinks they have it all figured out or it's all been handed to them and look no further, there's no room for that person to receive more. And so they don't ever get more. And then they wonder why they are so confused and don't have answers for themselves. It's because they really have shut down that flow from the divine, from God. So as you spend that time with yourself in quiet mornings, in contemplation, with a journal, with a candle, doing some deep breathing, and then just asking, what is it that I need to know? What needs to come through? Show me. Inquiry is a very, very powerful practice because it's opening. It opens you to receive. And you know when you're going into your false self, that questioning, like, does this make me feel more open and expansive, or does it kind of shut me down? Enlightenment is not a sustainable state in this earth sphere. There's another aspect of ourself that's excited by growth and thriving and change, and it's really robust. It's engaged in the world. It loves challenges. It's adventurous. Okay, that's the nature of our soul. But because we have built up ego structures and because to keep us safe, and because we are living in a world that operates under a lot of illusion, we cannot sustain that kind of way of being. But as we start to interact with other people who are awakened or who model or reflect back to us what it means to be free, then we start to activate that aspect of ourselves that has that growth challenge mindset. So that's what it means to have a conscious embodiment of enlightenment or of your true self. It doesn't resist struggle. It just really, really craves awakening. The whole mystery, right? The newness, the unknown doesn't really resonate with, this is the way it is. This is what you've been taught. This is what you need to do. Now go and do it. It does not, that's not freedom to the soul. So we awaken to this evolutionary self. We line up with this, and then we cultivate a relationship, our soul path, if you will, around that. And what happens as we start to awaken to become more conscious is we bring to the forefront of our consciousness, what it is that we're actually here to teach, do, feel, and be. And then the goal is that we move through our daily life based around that. That's kind of what I mean by sovereignty, and I talk about it almost on every episode, and I get pushback from it. It's like, what do you mean you're a sovereign? Well, like, you have to be. If God comes through you, to you, if you have a body and move that body through life, you're the only person that lives with you, technically, at all times. You and God, creator, the divine, goddess, however you want to define that higher power. A question I like to ask myself in this sort of like engaged inquiry process is, how does this feel in my body? I think that's something that I learned from yoga, is to trust my own knowing. I have to ask myself, how does this feel in my body? What creates conflict with this? How do I connect to that evolutionary impulse inside me, that part of me that loves the adventure and being alive and the questioning and the seeking? How do I become more aware of how everyone's connected on the earth and how they're all also evolving as a soul? So shifting perspective to stay with the practice of that, as I see it, one of the great tasks of life. It's that engaged inquiry. Byron Katie calls it the work. There's been many names for it. Eckhart Tolle talks about just like presencing, where it's just, what is the part of me that's aligned with the heart of the universe, the evolutionary impulse? What is that part of me, and how does it feel? And how do I know when I'm in that space? And I can't tell you what that feels like for you. I can tell you what it feels like for me. I feel thrilled. Also, I feel challenged. It's like this vast unknown. And rather than having it all figured out in my head, I have an experience in my body that through resonation, all I can describe it as my own knowing, my own innate embodied wisdom. It's like, oh yeah, that's evident. Yeah, that's a truth. I don't have any dissonance with that. That feels super aligned. One of the things that I was working through in my dark night of the soul period of life, which lasted, I really am just coming out on the other end of it, to be honest. And it was a 7-year cycle when it actually initiated. But I call it the dark night because everything turned upside down that I thought I knew. And it's something I had been asking to just get to the truth. I don't want illusion. Just, I have to know. I need to know. What is this? What is that? And it got so painful to sit with things that were question marks that didn't resonate, and I was trying to make them fit and they didn't. So that kind of launched me into it. And then as I went deeper, I kept feeling God say, are you ready for more? Okay, let's fortify here so there's more coming. And I could feel it come in waves, just absolute waves. And sometimes I would be like literally in fetal position, sobbing because a truth that I had held for so long, I now had this embodied knowing that it wasn't a truth anymore for me. And I wanted it to be. The Dark Night is a series of, it could be just one, like a life event that launches it. For me, it was bringing our last child into our home, Emma, who just turned 6. There was a lot of uncertainty fraught with that, and it challenged my very identity. It challenged my knowing. It challenged a lot of things, but it was just an invitation to look deeper inside of myself. It had nothing to do with her adoption or her being in foster care or her life being in peril in mine. It was not, that was secondary to what was actually happening on my interior self. But it was like, okay, I thought I knew this and I built my life around this thing, and now it's not true. Now who am I? When I was first presented with what I now know in my body to be a truth and my truth, when it first challenged my existing paradigm, I felt dissonance. I felt myself bucking up against what was comfortable and safe. So that was the paradox that initially it came through as absolute dissonance. And how could I even ask that? And how could I not accept that? You were told this your whole life. Why? How could you even question that? So there was dissonance. But then as I really climbed under it and asked and got still and did the breathing and did the work and asked and listened to my knowing and my body and the way God comes through me, I knew that that thing wasn't true anymore. So yeah, it's kind of this balance between critical thinking and honoring your own, oh, this is how truth lands in me. This is how I know how it feels. So I've heard two camps of people, like the people that are just in their heads, everything has to be science-based, everything has to be critically evaluated, whatever. There's people that live in that space. I wholeheartedly agree that that is so powerful to actually be able to think critically, and we need to value that more, especially in religious settings. But there's also this thing where the feminine works, and I mean that with a capital F, the divine feminine, the energy of wisdom, divine Sophia, womb awakening, wisdom rising, the great cosmic mother, ancient mother, heavenly mother, whatever you want to call that, it is not about critical thinking. It is a knowing. It is a force. You could call it the feminine face of God, goddess energy. There's so many names for it. Gaia, Earth Mother. There's so many names for what that knowing is. And as a planet, I feel like we're all men and women alike. We are all awakening to this force, and it's unleashed. That's why structures are dissolving and people are waking up to, hey, wait, you might have told me this doctrine, or you might have tried to force this truth on me, but it's not fitting. I can't make it fit. So this is happening in government. This is happening in schools all over the world with the race issue and how these old dogmas and the slavery and, it's just like, oh my gosh, what were we thinking? Why have we not examined this before? Why have we let these things perpetuate? So that engaged inquiry practice for me was huge because I let myself ask the questions that I didn't think I was allowed to ask, and that I could have potentially been publicly shamed for asking or told I wasn't righteous enough or whatever. But it became so sacred to have this contemplative spiritual practice in the mornings where I made this inquiry such a conversation with the divine, with God. And, on my own, yeah, I can deep dive, I can seek, but then I also realized that I needed other evolutionary people. I needed to take that practice into the world. And as I did, and as I engaged with other people who were in the process of awakening to this same thing I was, or who were looking for that enlightenment and alignment, it was almost like, again, we were reflecting back to each other our own truth of what we were seeking. And it was very, very validating. It was multiple witnesses came forward of their own volition. And I believe I attracted them to me as well in my asking and inquiry practice. As I bounced my knowing off them and vice versa, it was like, oh yeah, this is not just my truth. There are other people who also house this in their own embodied wisdom. And as I talked about, with Tanya last week on our episode, there's no one size fits all. There's no final, like, this is it. Everyone's arrived. Like, there is no program or path or institution or religion or group that has hit that. And if they're saying that they have every single ounce of truth, that's actually very, very laughable. There are so many details and mysteries. And so keeping that alignment, that need we have for inner alignment, front and center, brings that evolutionary impulse that we have in us out to the forefront. Like, it leads us, it heralds our arrival, and people's antennas pick it up. It's like, what is it about her or him that I feel so inspired by or attracted to? It's because they are honoring their own alignment. They're honoring their own evolutionary impulse. They have found a way to come into alignment with the heart of the cosmos, to be in oneness and unity consciousness rather than all this separation and pain and old patterning. So there's no way to stay consistently in that space because we are human, but we're not making our humanness the reason that we don't show up that way, that we don't align, that we don't make that engaged inquiry practice part of our lives. The engaged inquiry practice is like moment by moment. It's all day, every day, because your brain wants to keep you safe and in fight, flight, or freeze. It does not want you in your critical thinking to expand as a soul. But your divine self does. That authenticity and truth should override any need for comfort and security or acceptance from a group. And that is the soul and the heart of what sovereignty is. As you get to know your ego self and your old stories that you're holding on to, this happened to me, that person did that, this is how I was raised, this is this, as we hold on to these stories, we stay in our limitations. We keep playing out the old patterns. And to have radical awareness, to kind of wake up to, oh my gosh, like, that's not my authenticity. That's just a story I'm holding. That's not who I am. We get freedom. We get freedom from all those conflicting emotions that don't allow us to see and speak our truth. We are liberated from those old patterns and fears and emotions and limitations as we say, no, I that's not who I am. Like, that's what happened to me, or that was my experience, but that's not who I am. We want to be able to be around others who are on the path of that kind of an evolution. We form these sacred partnerships with them. And it's not a business it's actually not transactional at all. It's experiential, where we create new cultures and communities with others that are expansive and inclusive and welcoming, full of radical compassion. This is that deep longing we all have, is for that kind of community. Generation Z will probably be the ones who figure out how we do that in healthy ways without being exclusionary. I'm hopeful. I'm Generation X, and I'm hopeful that we can help awaken others to the need for this, that there's no reason to make any one group special over another, that we're all one. We're all alike unto God. We're all children of God. We're all here to learn and expand and grow. So yeah, that deep longing is there. So we sometimes just need to take our cues from other people. We can't isolate ourselves. One of the most validating things for me was just when I thought I was hitting rock bottom, this was all in my head and I needed to go back to my comfort zone, and something would happen, like a person would say something or someone would reach out, or I'd be watching a movie and a line would just hit me and I'd be like, okay, all right, I got it. Okay. Or I'd have a dream. I get a lot of dreams that are very symbolic. How does the divine, your higher power, and your soul voice come through for you? And honestly, I run a Stand, Speak, Shine school. I'm about to launch a feminine boss school. I run an international business. I have 5 children. I get asked this all the time because I'll say a statement like that, like, oh, listen to your soul voice. It has to be so loud that you drown out the voices of others and all you hear is you and God. And they're like, well, how do you do that? How do you know what that is? It goes back to what I just started this with, that quote by Brene Brown. We have to come to the place where the old thinking is done. It's time. It's time to stop pretending and performing for others, find new ways to cope, different mechanisms of coping, stop feeling that we're so inadequate and getting all hung up on everyone else is better or doing it right and we're not. Life is such a grand adventure. If we put up so much armor, like she talked about putting up armor that prevents us from growing into our gifts, like that's what it is. we wall ourselves off from people, places, and opportunities that could potentially be the key to our complete soul expansion. But you find your soul voice as you act, as you do the things it tells you to do. Now, I have to say, your soul voice is different than other voices that could come through you, like your own critical thinking in your head or the spirit of God. Now, and that might raise some eyebrows, so let me explain that. There's the spirit, voice of truth, God, what have you, Holy Ghost. There's lots of spirit, whatever you want to call it. But that's not the same as your spirit, your divine spirit. Now, they blend as one when you are in alignment. So when I'm talking about sovereignty, it's like, no, you will know there's just very subtle messaging that wants to rise and bubble up. And it's usually heart-based or lower chakra-based in that sacral chakra, which is your creative center, kind of below your belly button. That's a portal area for receiving truth, especially in women. It's called womb wisdom. So between that and your heart, there's all these knowings and gut reactions and gut responses and intimations and intuitions that want to rise up to get to your brain so that you'll actually notice and that you will actually make a plan to act on it. So it's not just impulsive. It's actually very beautiful, intelligent truth coming and streaming up that wants to travel from your gut and heart up to your head. So that's why we can't just rely on critical thinking. We have to tap into the other dimensions of who we are and have whole-bodied communication happening. There is that magic formula for each soul, for each one of you. And I'm still fine-tuning it for myself, but I can tell when I'm pandering to please people and saying things that might make people feel better or so that I can feel better, so that I fit in, versus when I'm speaking a soul knowing. I can tell you that I've sat in many settings, in many public settings over the years where I knew something that was being taught or perpetuated was an illusion and was harming. And I didn't raise my hand and I didn't speak out. And when you swallow that enough times, it would come out in my journaling, actually. I'd be like, I can't believe they said that and this. And like, am I crazy? Am I evil? Why does this bother me? And it's not bothering everyone else, until I started to speak out. And then I realized that it was bothering a lot of other people too. We're kind of talking about going into that wilderness to seek your own enlightenment. We don't have the luxury to do that. We have all these responsibilities, right? We can't physically take 40 days and go in the wilderness like Jesus did, or Gandhi, or all these, Mother Teresa. They just lived in these more, I guess they had the ability to be more sequestered, right? We don't have that luxury today. So the way we go into our wilderness is we get a pen and a notepad out and we start writing, or we start speaking out, or we start really getting real with the questions we have and really examining how it shows up in the body. How does this feel in my body? Does this open and expand me, this idea, this practice, this way of thinking and being? Or does it feel constrictive, like it's keeping me from a part of myself that I have to compartmentalize or put on a shelf or put away? And there are a lot of truths that we're presented with. We don't know what to do with them right away, so we do need to shelve them. But that doesn't mean it doesn't resonate somewhere in the body first. Like, oh, okay, there's something to that. I know, I feel in my bones there is something to that, but I can't deal with it right now. There will come a time when that gets totally loaded up. You feel so heavy in your being that you've put all these things to the side, or put them on a shelf, or tucked them away somewhere, or not expressed it, or not questioned, and then just becomes too painful to carry that burden. Some people get autoimmune disorders. Some people have such high cortisol levels that they get sick because they've stuffed so long and so hard, so often and so chronically. They get sick. I guess what I'm trying to say in this episode is that you have so much capacity to step into your evolutionary self through this engaged inquiry practice. No one can tell you what feels free or doesn't feel free for you. And we all have different paths in terms of what we came here to learn. And so sometimes what we're here to learn is to stay in a system that feels oppressive so that we can sort of rise up and help to awaken others. And sometimes another person's path, even though they have awakened, is to step out of that system or that culture or that family or whatever, because it is not aligning with them. It's not helping them. They've learned what they needed to learn, and now they need to move forward. One of my favorite quotes is, if you learned, it wasn't a mistake. I see the whole purpose of life that way. Rather than beating ourselves up for not being righteous enough, or maybe we didn't do something quite right and that's why we didn't get a blessing, or maybe if we just did this other spiritual practice, we'd be worthy. That is such a hamster wheel that will get you nowhere but feeling more and more shame and guilt, which does not expand your soul. You are a sovereign being walking in a world that is full of darkness, but also so much beauty, so much adventure. Giving yourself the freedom to be you, to express yourself and to discover who you are outside of what you've been told you are, outside of what you've been programmed you need to be. So I'll end with that, and just with my blessing and gratitude that you are listening and you made it this far in my episode. And I'm just so grateful for my loyal listeners. I hear from a lot of you, and I know that this is a tough time on the earth. It's also a time to rise. It's also a time to get out of what's familiar and comfortable. It's going to happen anyway. It's starting to happen everywhere. What's comfortable and safe and what we thought was an anchor for us sometimes is an illusion. So the world needs what you have, and it's time for you to stand up and be who you truly are.